I just want to remind everybody who's interested in making purchases in our store that our cyber sale will end tomorrow, November 30th. So the sale will go through November 30th. And use the code CYBER on the cart page before proceeding to checkout to receive 40% off everything in our store. Beginning December 1st, we will have a holiday sale with 20% off everything from December 1st through the end of the year. So if you missed this sale, you can still do that one. Thanks also to Patricia Martin for doing this series of interviews that we are publishing as part of our holiday giving drive. If you would like to support the Institute, you can make a donation by clicking the link in the show notes or by going to jungchicago.org/give. Every bit does help. Okay, thanks. Welcome to the Jung Anthology podcast from the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago. Jung in the World, Jung and the New Generation of Creatives with Jessica Carson. In this episode, Patricia Martin interviews author Jessica Carson about her life, her book Wired This Way, and the contemporary culture. Jessica Carson is the Director of Innovation at the American Psychological Association, an expert in residence at Georgetown University, and founder of the Magnum Opus Academy. Jessica is the author of Wired This Way, an exploration of the light and dark of the creative mind, which bears its own TED Talk. With a diverse background in psychology, neuroscience, startups, venture capital, and mindfulness, Jessica's work sits at the intersection of psychology and creatorship. She has been featured across a range of institutions, including Georgetown University, the London School of Economics, Columbia Business School, Oxford University Press, and many others. Before we get to the interview, I just want to read a couple submissions from our listeners. Thomas from Denmark says, I'm in training as a Jungian analyst and looking for podcasts about anything Jungian, generally hoping to find nuggets of wisdom about the role of soul and spirit in our life in the material world of work and relationships. An anonymous listener from Illinois says, after 40 years asleep in the corporate world, I ended up in rehab for alcohol abuse. I believe the AA influence program saved my life and brought me back from the edge of suicide. I was only vaguely aware of the Jungian connection to the 12 steps, and this podcast helped me understand the deep connection. In addition, Jung's works have reacquainted me with my long-lost religion and given a glimpse of why there might be or must be meaning in life. It is encouraging to listen to literate, psychologically well-adjusted presenters speak unashamedly about synchronicity, the God imago, the self, and other spiritual topics that I consciously repressed or even ridiculed so I would not be seen as a nut by my corporate competitors. The Jungian Institute's podcasts are a real public service, and I commend you. Well, thank you. So thanks to everybody who has continued to share a little bit about yourselves. If you would like to share something about yourself, where you currently are in your learning and exploration, just click the link in the show notes and I'd be happy to read it. You can support this free podcast by making a donation, becoming a member of the Institute, or making a purchase in our online store. Your support enables us to provide free and low-cost educational resources to all. And if you make a donation now, it'll be part of our holiday giving drive. So please help us reach our $25,000 goal by the end of the year if you can. Thanks so much. And now here's the interview.
Hello, this is Patricia Martin, and welcome to Jungian Anthology. I'm a professional affiliate at the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago, and I'll be your host today. In this series, we'll be talking with people whose work intersects with Jung's ideas to tell a more contemporary story of his enduring impact in a brave new world. Carl Jung was known to be endlessly creative and said, "Art is an innate drive within all of us. People who identify as creatives are prone to certain mental health issues that are somewhat specific to their work. In particular, their shadow material is often overlooked in the culture in favor of a more romantic, poetic view of their identities. Author Jessica Carson uses Jungian theory in her book, Wired This Way, that is a guide to the well-being of the creative spirit. And it helps us understand creatives as a more fully complex human being. Hello, Jessica Carson. Welcome to Jungian Anthology.
Thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be here.
Well, I am about halfway through your latest book, Wired This Way, on finding mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being as a creator.
Yes. How you liking it?
Yeah. Right. A beautiful cover too, might I add.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, I have to ask, what inspired you to write this book at this time?
Yeah. So the book is not about me per se, but I do include one chapter where I talk about sort of the grotesque details of why this work came to be, because we can only really teach what we ourselves have experienced. And for better or for worse, my coming to this work arrived through my own dark night of the soul, as happens to so many of us. A few years ago, I was working in venture capital. So I was a young woman working in a very archetypally masculine environment, all about stoicism and aggression and logic and practicality. And all I wanted to do was to conform with that version of success. And I ended up wandering so far away from myself and my archetypally feminine qualities, my intuition, my creativity, that my body ended up giving me a sign that I was out of alignment. And that was quite symbolically that I began to lose my hair as a young 20-something year old woman. And that was devastating to me, but it was really a wake-up call that set me on this path to understand why the creative mind, the entrepreneurial mind, these high potential minds tend to be so prone to both the light and the dark of experience. And really, it began as a quest to better understand myself and my own wiring, with the aim of hopefully creating a map of sorts that maybe ideally other people could use to guide their journey. So it was born from a lot of pain and misery, as a lot of good things are, but I'm so pleased that it's out in the world now.
Oh, it must be wonderful. You've spread the message of this book now around the world. You've got a TED Talk. And I'm just wondering, what are you learning from the way people respond to your message?
Oh, it's so interesting because, the book is about the light and the dark of the entrepreneurial and creative mind. And so what I find is that there are two kind of cohorts of people in terms of how they respond to the book. One cohort, which I would probably say are maybe the majority of people, they just don't get it. They don't understand this idea of, or really care to understand the idea of having multitudes and being full of contradiction and being full of complexity, and really actually leaning into that and understanding why our shadows and why our dark side, so to speak, contains so much of our creative and productive potential. But then for the people who it does resonate with, it really, really deeply resonates. And so it tends to resonate with people who are sensitive high potentials, right? They're empaths who are very kind of grounded in their pursuit of earthly success, but are constantly in this battle between sort of their practical pursuits and their deep, deep sensitivity and their desire, their seeking tendencies. And so it's been difficult because I'd love for everyone to just love it. But that's not always the case, right? And I think that in a way that actually means that I'm probably doing something right.
Yeah. When I think about, I just read the other day, I was reading Deirdre Baer's biography of Carl Jung, and she says that Carl Jung ended up believing at the end, near the end of his life, that he would remain misunderstood because his ideas were simply too complex.
Yeah.
And too hard to describe. He was describing things one had to believe in without seeing necessarily. Yeah. And that Maria von Franz said that his writing style was actually quite intentional.
Yeah.
It wasn't a mishap. And so I think this business of complexity is, it's a very timely issue because we have shorter and shorter attention spans. We want a bumper sticker explanation that we can
want an
away.
Airport read, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so I have to ask this question: as you were working with venture capitalists, who, by the way, are notorious for asking the same questions and, assessing the value proposition through the same set of rigors that the other venture capitalists use. I mean, it's a pretty buttoned down culture. And here you are, you self-describe as a creative.
Yeah.
You self-describe as somebody who's complex. What was it like to be in that dissonance?
Oh, I mean, it was soul wrenching to the point of having like a complete crisis of meaning, because I was young enough at the time, and I was also, had that kind of desire to please, particularly desire to please the masculine, both literally and metaphorically, in terms of making my bosses happy, but also really appeasing to the masculine. I completely abandoned, everything that you see in me now, and you see me on camera. So you see I have art all around me. I have a feminine home, a feminine aesthetic, a feminine, I guess, essence about me. But if when I was working in venture capital, that was not the case at all. I mean, I wore black turtlenecks. I wore, I was impatient and sharp and aggressive and all of those things, because I thought that that's what it meant to be a successful creator. And so I was experiencing all kinds of distress as a result of what I was suppressing within myself, which was the feminine that wanted to emerge. And then, of course, the symbolism of losing the hair, really the ultimate symbol of the feminine, of wisdom. And
I'm looking at you now with these long golden tresses, thinking, oh, as you're pulling that out of your, by the handful, it must have been dazzlingly frightening.
Oh, I love that you use that word, because it was exactly that. And, I went to doctor after doctor and healer after healer, and I really channeled the masculine qualities that I had cultivated at first into finding answers. And I flew out to Mayo Clinic, and I mean, nobody could give me an answer. And it only stopped when I began to accept it and look at the complexity that underlied the issue, looked at the dualities in my own personality that I wasn't making space for, because it can be so, so difficult in a world that does love the bumper sticker, as you say, to be both masculine and feminine, to be logical and creative, to be practical and intuitive, to be scientific and whimsical, to be all of these things. And I mean, to be honest, I still struggle with that balance as someone who is very authentically feels like I have one foot in both worlds. But that's also, I think, the beautiful challenge of this world that we're living in, where people are encouraged to be the wholeness of who they are, is can we challenge ourselves to be all of those things concurrently without depleting ourselves by ping-ponging so drastically between the two, which is what I felt that I was doing.
Oh, so interesting. So when did you, in the process of understanding that, here's what I'm hearing from you, complex people can often fall ill in complex ways. In other words,
sure.
It's not just one thing. It's not just one diagnosis.
Well,
it's as layered as they are.
That's exactly right. So not to cheat on Jung by bringing up William James, but he has a concept that I love, which is the concept of the difference between the once born soul and the twice born soul. And so William James believes that the once born souls are the people among us who he deems the healthy souls, right? So these are the people who they don't care much about the complexities in the world or the complexities in themselves. To them, the world is generally fine. They kind of view the world as through rose-tinted lenses, and they don't have this like innate desire to change the world or to change themselves. But as a result of that kind of general happiness, they don't suffer that much in mind, body, or spirit. Whereas the twice born soul, which I think anyone listening to this podcast, anyone who follows Jung, I think is a twice born soul, as James was, as I am, as I'm quite sure you are as well, are the people who view the world as a double-storied mystery, right? Like we are acutely aware of our own flaws and shortcomings, as well as the flaws and shortcomings in the world around us. And as a result of this acute awareness, we tend to struggle in mind, body, and spirit. We are the sick souls, so to speak, but he also said we are the souls with the most potential, because through that journey of kind of disintegrating, of being so acutely aware of all of the potentialities that you can expand into as a person or the world can expand into, because of your willingness to look into that gap between reality and possibility, that's where people change the world. And so that's also why creators tend to, the case that I make in the book is that the reason that creators tend to disproportionately struggle with things like mental illness or emotional distress or stress-related illness or existential meltdowns or fill in the blank is because the twice born souls are self-selecting into these complex and difficult endeavors because they're looking to grow into their potentialities and because they're looking to heal the world or leave an impact or fulfill their destiny. They feel filled with this sense of having a purpose or having a destiny and are willing to do the hard thing to get there, but in the process are susceptible to, the dark nights of the soul, but only because they're here with a purpose, right? So it's kind of this Ouroboros, it's a circular kind of process.
Well, it strikes me that because Carl Jung worked with people who were in psychological distress, or they wouldn't be showing up to his practice, that he was very much seeing and dealing with people and their complexities. So for instance, he thought that there was a lot of healing potential in fairy tales.
Yeah.
And, you read fairy tales now and they're not made by Disney. They have light and they have dark.
Oh yeah.
And it is the alchemy and the energy that gets cast off by those, that shadow material that enters into the story that takes what could be a very childlike, wondrous story and turns it into something that, becomes very dark, but only to render a lesson creatively.
Yes,
and so
does that make sense to you? It completely does. I mean, Jung said there is no energy unless there's a tension of opposites, right? Mm-hmm. You need to have this, just as you need in every good storyline, look at Joseph Campbell as an example in the hero's journey. You have to have, in order to have this rich and meaningful story or rich and meaningful journey, you have to go into the abyss. You have to go into the belly of the whale, and then you have to return with the elixir. And it's the contrast of the two that make the movie so great, or the book so beautiful, or the song so powerful. And I think in the same way, those of us who are running around with, whether it's traumas or innate predispositions to mental illness or astounding systemic sensitivity. Hello, my empaths and highly sensitive people out there. We contain those dyads. We contain the dualities that, when combined, can be both highly creative but also highly destructive. So if you think about, atoms smashing together in a nuclear reactor, when that's harnessed properly, you create electrical energy. You light up Manhattan. When that's not harnessed properly, you have Chernobyl, right? And so I think the same thing can be said of those complexities and those dualities within the individual as well. So the fact that I kind of had these, let's say, masculine and feminine tendencies that were banging up against each other inside of my being, but I didn't know how to harness them. I had my own kind of Chernobyl meltdown, right? But now,
your own descent story, right?
Right. But now
you have to shed your rings and your garments, and
everything was radioactive. Absolutely. I mean, the graphite was everywhere. But then, now it's not that I'm any less complex, right? But now on my good days, right, I'm able to harness that so that instead of being a meltdown, it turns into a book, or it turns into a TED Talk, or it turns into a beautiful conversation like this.
Thank you. Well, I'm wondering though, so how did you come to the work of Carl Jung? Everyone, that's always, whenever I ask that story, by the way, I always ask people to tell me their Jung story.
Yeah.
It's complex.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
This was not just any old, how do you do?
Yeah. No. And it was not for me either. It was actually extraordinarily uncanny and actually disconcerting. I think it was either Elton John or the Beatles who wrote a song, woke up in the middle of the night and their head was filled with this song, and they could have sworn it was so clear to them that they could have sworn they stole it from somebody else, because the song came through and it was so great and so clear, and they thought that they were like channeling someone else's song. And I think that song ended up being Let It Be, actually. I have to fact check myself on that one. But so my experience being introduced to him was actually not being introduced to him. So I wrote the book Wired This Way, having almost no knowledge of Jung. So I worked at the National Institutes of Health. I have a background in psychology, but I really didn't know much at all about the work of Jung. And then I ended up writing this book in a very kind of intuitive way. For people who are open to it, I often think that I channeled it in a sense, and it just kind of came through. And then when I started circulating it to publishers, everyone was like, oh, you wrote a book on Jungian psychology. And so I was just kind of confused by this. And I started looking into it more. And I realized that, oh my God, I had written a book around a Jungian framework of the light and the dark, and the use of archetypes, and the power in opposites, and the power of wholeness and integration. And I had actually used terms that are his, I'd used terms in the book like integration or light and dark without ever knowing that those were actually terms that he had used. And so it was just so it was only in the aftermath of circulating the book that I started diving very deeply into the work of Jung. And as I did, I realized, oh my God, I know all of, not I know all of this, right? But it's so familiar because it's intuitive, right? And I think that that's increasingly the case, is that people are coming to recognize the power in archetypes and symbolism and shadow work and light and dark. And they don't even necessarily always realize that that's an existing framework or paradigm that's out in the world, but perhaps they're downloading it from, the collective, or they're just very in touch and in tune and intuitive themselves. Whatever the case, I do think that his work is making a comeback in big and powerful ways. And whether it's always attributed to him, it may not be, but I think it's powerful nonetheless.
Well, I wonder, as you now, my understanding of your career is that you're working in health still, but for a large health organization.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that gives you a bird's eye view into the nature of the collective in this moment. And what is the state of the collective from where Jessica sits today? So, Dr. Carson, what's the state of the collective?
The state of the collective. Oh God. I mean, I don't think I could speak for the whole collective, but one interesting, I think, one interesting aspect that I'd like to touch on that I see or learn about a lot of through my work is the state of distress in young people. In teenagers, the rates of mental illness are astronomically high. The rates of things like suicidality are rising. And, I can't help but think that, we are in a world now where this idea of you can be anything, you can be any gender, you can be any orientation, you can be, and that, all those are wonderful, beautiful luxuries to have, the ability to be anything that you want. I also think it can be tremendously overwhelming when you give a tiny human the ability to look at the whole complex world and their complexities and say, craft your own sort of make your own sense of it. And I think that can be extremely anxiety inducing to see all that's wrong in the world. And I think there's a lot of interesting things that are happening with the woke movement that are not necessarily good. And I think that it can create a lot of stress and anxiety in these little identities that are still forming. And so I think that there's a lot of overwhelm that's happening around kind of the blessing and the burden of being able to be anything and everything that you want, right?
Yes, you're making me want to reflect on some of what Jung had to say about, sacredness and understanding the power of the divine in our lives. And when that is removed and it's all on us, the burden is getting ever more, as we become more complex and the world becomes more complex, the burden gets heavier and heavier. And the question is, how far can we go? Yes. Is there a point when we begin to break down in order to become something else? In the same way that, we have a descent story. Do we begin a descent story? And then is there a recoalescence of our collective sense of how the world works? I don't know. I mean, it's a big, complex question I'm asking here, but I'd love to hear what you would chip into that.
Yeah, well, and you actually said it. This is the first time I'm articulating this in real time. So and I don't want to be misconstrued as saying that having these sort of social liberties of gender fluidity or what have you is a bad thing, because it certainly is not. But, I think that when we're given so much autonomy combined with so much awareness of the complexities of the world, because now through social media and through the news and all of that, there's just, we're kind of like allowed to sort of disintegrate and reintegrate ourselves in all of these different ways. But for a young person, that just must feel so overwhelming and so difficult. I have a lot of empathy for young people today, especially around social media, because they're also seeing all of the selves that they could possibly be, right? They're seeing all of the different little bottles of elixirs on the shelf, and what that is going to do to the individual and collective identity. Will that be a good thing? Or will that be kind of a chaotic thing where we lose that sense of anchoring in who we are, because our boundaries of the mind become so thin, so permeable, so playful, that we lose that sense of us. But maybe that sense of us is not actually, I don't know, maybe we shouldn't aim for that. These are big, complicated questions.
Well, it's making me wonder, though. You sound like someone, because you have, again, self-identified as being creative and hence complex. You have to be working on something right now. What is making Jessica Carson tick right now?
I love that. So I'm working on another book right now. This one is looking at actually reclaiming the power of dark events. So looking at aspects of our dark history and making a case for actually why we shouldn't be canceling any of it. Because what we so often see, in the same sense that post-traumatic growth may happen for the individual, this also happens collectively, right? So in the aftermath of terrorist attacks or natural disasters or plagues or what have you, we often see these amazing creative births following the dark periods. We see the return following the descent. And I believe that what we are doing by shaming the people or events or activities we deem as dark, or by canceling them, or this obsession with woke culture, which is really all about projection, is we're actually not allowing those growth cycles to complete themselves, right? We're kind of cutting them short of their transformation potential. So instead of actually allowing the dark to transform into the light, we're just kind of chopping the seedling off at the roots. And so it is looking at historical examples of whether it's the Chernobyl, to bring up that example, or the syphilis pandemic, or the bubonic plague, or a factory fire. We see so much actually light on the other end of this darkness if we allow the cycle to kind of transpire naturally, and why we really need to be taking more of that perspective when we're so quick just to take, burn everything down and take everything down and what have you, because there's a lot that we can learn from the darkness if we're tolerant of it.
Well, yes. Why are we so intolerant of it, though? Why is it so frightening?
It's an excellent question. I feel like this was one of Jung's core driving questions, right? Is like, why are we so scared to look at the shadows and the darkness? And I'm sure he said it somewhere better than I ever could, but I have to imagine it's because, we're so scared of what we ourselves contain, right? Because we all contain darkness and shadows. And so by canceling it, it's projection, and we are living in a culture now that really just is very rooted in the masculine archetype and thinks that everything can just be good and fine and productive and stoic and orderly all the time. But really, with the dark feminine, with the chaos, we get the tornado clearing the field for new growth. We get the forest fire cracking open the seeds to be planted. We get the chaos paves the path for the next cycle of lightness. And so when we stop that short, we're really doing ourselves a disservice. And we see it time and again throughout history, how the bubonic plague was followed by the Italian Renaissance, or how the wars of religion were followed by the Enlightenment, or, this is just history repeats itself again and again, if we're willing to, and we can learn from it, but only if we're willing to understand it and accept it.
Well, here's what I would like to say about complex questions and complex people and complex ideas, is that whenever we have someone on Jungian Anthology who can speak so eloquently to all of that, we always feel like jubilant, like, oh, wow, this is someone who really can handle it,
I love that.
Right. It's not not a keep it simple kind of, if you're a Jungian, nothing is simple.
Nothing is simple. Do you ever have simple guests?
Right, exactly. But by the same token, I just want to I want you to think about your elixir and the elixir of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I am going to ask you to boil it down into something that is a takeaway for people. We, the thing about complexity, and I think this is part of our burnout as a society, is we listen to stories and we know there's more to them than meets the eye. We know that it's not a simple problem. We know but we're listening to a simple piece of news about it. And it's distilled down in such a way that if you're a complex person, you're having to sense, the reverberance of the complexity without it ever being acknowledged. And so, while it seems like an unfair question, hey, boil this down for me. I know that people also are really grateful when they know, if there was one small step, if there was one thing that I could do or understand or have perspective about, then, I'm better for it. Yeah. I'm not helpless.
Yeah.
So let's start with what do you mean when you say elixir?
So for me, elixir has a few meanings. I mean, elixir is obviously referring to some kind of medicinal or healing substance. So it's something that confers a degree of healing. But it's also, in Campbell's hero's journey, it's the return with the elixir is sort of the end point. And the elixir doesn't necessarily have to be a medicinal potion. It can be a lesson. It can be, a learning. It can be a relationship. It can be a creation. So really, to me, an elixir is the outcome of the process going into the shadow and then emerging with some kind of transformation.
So when you finished writing this book and you saw it in print and you got to hold it in your hands, what came to you as, if there's one thing I want people to get from this book, it's this? In other words, I'm asking you, what was your elixir that you wanted to share with this book?
Hope. I wanted to share hope because for people who are so sensitive, for people who are so aware, for people who are so complicated, you can always feel like there's something wrong with you. My whole life, I had people telling me there was just always something wrong with me because I was processing and perceiving the world in a different way. And even the things that I thought were great about myself, people still thought was weird or, somehow pathological because it was different. And I wanted to give a sense of hope that the scarlet letters, the skeletons, the sensitivities, the shadows, that those are treasures too. And that's what makes you so miraculous as a creator. And that the second that you begin listening to the dialogue that says you should doubt it, or you should pathologize it, or you should hide it, or shame it, or suppress it, that's when you begin losing your creative magic. So the message would be, if any of this resonates with you, I hope you feel a sense of hope that you're not broken, but that you're just wired this way, and that's a beautiful way to be wired.
What a fantastic message. And it's a perfect place to end today. Thank you so much, Jessica Carson, for being with us.
Thank you.
This podcast is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Share it all you like as long as you maintain the attribution to the speaker, but please do not change it or sell it. If you like this episode, tell your friends about us or leave us a review on iTunes. For more information about classes, training programs, videos, audio, this podcast, or to find a Jungian analyst near you, visit our website, www.jungchicago.org. Thank you to our 2020 donors who gave at the contributing member level and above: Barbara Anand, Usha and Ashok Beatty, Jackie Cabe Bryan, Eric Cooper and Judith Cooper, Kevin Davis, George J. Didier, Mary Doherty, James Fidelibus, John Korolewski, Marty Manning, Diane Sherwood, Deborah P. Stutzman, Deborah Tobin, Alexander Wayne and Lynn Kopp, Gerald Weiner, Karen West and James Taylor, and Ellen Young. If you would like to join our generous community of supporters, just go to youngchicago.org/give.